Hello, friends. Today, we are about to embark on a special journey, not to be entertained, but to feel, to imagine, and to listen to history with both our hearts and our minds. Imagine this. You wake up not in your familiar room, but beneath a cold stone arch, where the darkness feels thicker than the air, and the chill seeps through every fold of your clothes, every strand of your hair. There is no light, no traffic outside, no signal from the world beyond. Only the sound of dripping water, as if time itself is dissolving, like a broken clock, still trying to count its final moments. In that place, the only light comes from a narrow slit above, just wide enough to lower a wooden bowl, your single meal of the day. A thin soup, sometimes tainted with the taste of metal, reminding you of decay and the weariness of a space that feels like it has existed far too long and now remains only as a shadow. No one knows what day it is, or even whether it is morning or night. Time is not measured by hours or minutes there, but by footsteps in the hallway, the creak of rusty hinges, or simply the return of hunger. The damp air makes everything heavier. Damp clothes, tired thoughts, paper-thin sleep, and dreams that shatter, half real, half imagined. Some say there were moments when they didn't know whether they were awake or asleep, because everything was buried in a dim, lifeless gray. One person said he once used a dull iron spoon to scrape the wall, not to escape, but just to prove he could still do something. Each scratch on the stone was a proof that he had existed, that he hadn't disappeared. After a few days, the scent of rust still lingered, unclear whether it came from the tool or from a will beginning to corrode. An old man once imprisoned there for heretical beliefs recalled, "There were winters when just a strange glance, a whispered thought against the flow, was enough to send someone down into the dungeon. No trial, no reason needed. No one asked further. Once, he said, in the darkness, silence is the most dangerous voice." And indeed, no one ever slept deeply. Some muttered in their sleep. Some fell so silent it was as if they had vanished from the world. Groans echoed from beyond the walls, even though those who once stayed there had long been taken away. When someone new arrived, a scream would often break the silence, then fade. That initial resistance never lasted long, because they soon realized there were no ears here to listen and no light to reach for. Gradually, they learned how to survive. Don't ask questions. Don't stand out. Don't trust promises. Don't expect anything. Silence was the only cloak that could offer protection. But that silence wasn't peace. It was a fragile shell between existence and oblivion. The stones would absorb rainwater when it stormed outside, leaving cold trails that touched your hands. Some people would reach up, not to pray, but to catch the rare drops of pure water. They said the taste reminded them of meadows, of the village well, where childhood once lived. Memories, however small, were the only things that couldn't be locked away. From time to time, the guard would toss in a coarse rag, still damp, still reeking of horse stables. Some wrapped it around their feet, not for warmth, but to cover blisters they no longer wished to see. Others shared it quietly, a final act of kindness, in a place where kindness was as rare as light. There was once a young man who asked, "How do you survive?" A voice in the dark replied, "Don't make a sound." That night, when the guard came, no names were called, no one was dragged from their cell, but only one breath remained heavy when the silence returned. This story is not about what happened to one person, but about how a society can turn silence into a tool of control. Fear doesn't always come from torture, but from not knowing if tomorrow still exists. From being forgotten, erased from every record, as if you never lived at all. In the darkest corners of history, what terrifies most is not only oppression, but forgetting, when your name is never spoken again, and your voice dissolves into stone walls, becoming a part of that place, voiceless and formless. It is a place where there's no day or night, only thick, heavy time, flowing slowly and steadily, like water dripping on stone, steady, cold, but never stopping, and as a quiet reminder that sometimes history doesn't thunder through victories, but whispers like an unformed dream, a dream of justice, of freedom, of light, still being quietly repeated, within walls as silent as stone. Time in the dungeon was no longer measured by days, but by how many times one was taken out of their cell. Each time, the guard would open the door, grab the prisoner's hand as if pulling a heavy sack, then half drag, half push them through damp, winding hallways, so familiar they could be walked in a dream. At the end of the corridor, a square room waited. No instruments of torture, no dried blood. Only a wooden table, a wooden chair, and a faint strip of light falling through a slit high in the wall. "Sit. What's your name? Were you there that day?" Others said you were. The voice was not loud, not angry. It ticked like a clock, repeating familiar questions with slight variations. One word changed order. One tense was altered. These subtle shifts weakened memory, making the listener begin to doubt themselves. An answer that once felt certain suddenly turned soft, like wet flour. One time, the clerk flipped through an old leather notebook. On the page was the name of the person being questioned, the black ink underlined in red. Below it, a simple note. No reaction, but easily swayed. A modern historian once asked, were those interrogations truly about uncovering religious truth? Or were they just a way to legitimize charges that had already been decided in order to preserve social order? That question, over time, still has no clear answer. No one was ever allowed to ask back. But sometimes, a glance was returned, as if a silent thought passed between them. If our roles were reversed, would they understand this feeling? One day, the prisoner was taken to a different room. On the wall hung a circular object, like an old wheel covered in dust. No one touched it, unless the guard placed a hand on its iron bar, making a dry creak sound. A message that required no words, On another day, the room changed again. A larger chair stood there, its armrests worn smooth with time. The questioner was a small old man with brass-rimmed glasses, his eyes hard to read. Have you ever dreamed of flying? Do you believe people can change form? Do you trust yourself more, or God more? At that point, everyone understood. This was no longer about behavior, but an investigation into thoughts. And thoughts, in that era, could be the grounds for any sentence. In a blurry dream, the image of a man stealing fish appeared, wearing a straw hat, speaking in a tongue no one understood. Upon waking, the prisoner's sleeves were soaked. No one knew if it was water or tears. A small scrap of paper appeared in a pocket after one interrogation. On it, scribbled, "Silence is the voice of those who survive." No one knew who had left it, but everyone understood. Someone once screamed through the night when they first arrived. 3 days later, the screams stopped. Their old straw mat lay empty. Breathing became a ritual. Counting slowly, steadying the rhythm, not to relax, but to hide the sound of a racing heart. History records a trial in Toulouse in the year 1319. A woman was sentenced, simply because she answered too quickly during questioning. The judge believed that if a response came without hesitation, it meant it had been rehearsed, a sign of sorcery. And thus, in that era, forgetfulness became a survival skill. It may sound absurd, but at times, people truly forgot their own names. When asked again, "Name," only a long silence followed, not out of resistance, but because memory had worn down, like stone shaped by storms. Then once, someone responded differently. "Who led you into the forest that night?" "I don't remember the forest. I only remember the moon. It looked like my mother's eyes." The scribe paused. The answer didn't make sense, but something in it made the room fall still. After that, the person wasn't called for an entire week. A reward or a warning, no one could tell. Among the guards, a strange story was passed around. A woman had once been interrogated but gave no reply. Instead, she recited a poem about a snail, 72 lines, each one a different color. No one understood it. But when she finished, they let her go. Not because she convinced them, but because they couldn't bear another round like that. That story became something to cling to. Sometimes, just one odd thought, like quietly humming a nursery rhyme, or recalling a recipe for curing the flu, was enough to preserve a sliver of self amidst the storm of doubt. Because in a place where words could become crimes, sometimes a meaningless word was the only way to survive. Each spoonful of soup brought to the mouth had become a quiet ritual, not truly to feel full, but as a way to affirm that, amidst chaos and unraveling, there was still something one could control. People no longer ate in haste. Instead, they silently picked out the solid bits, leaving behind the watery broth, as if each bite was a stand against the erosion of self. Food became the topic of whispered talk inside the cell. Someone said they once saw a piece of meat, but no one could be sure where it came from. Another joked that if the soup smelled better than usual one day, someone would be gone the next. It was only half a joke, because in a place where all rules were inverted, even vague stories became silent beliefs used to stay sane. The human smell of the dungeon was something no one could get used to. The scent of wounds, of dampness, of flesh under strain, all blended into a thick layer of air, as if the stench itself was also imprisoned here. People learned to breathe shallowly, avoiding deep inhales. They imagined they were in a forest, where wind carried the smell of wet grass and young blossoms. Some even crafted scents in their minds to make breathing easier. A bundle of dried lavender held in memory, a fragrant scrap of cloth from the past. These became imagined escape routes. One day, an elderly woman was placed in the cell across the hall. Her hair was pure white, but her eyes still held something clear and bright. People began calling her the Herb Lady. There were rumors she had once been a physician for a noble family. Others whispered she was a witch. Perhaps both were true. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the room fell quiet. Phrases like, "Don't scratch," "Tap the skin," "Lice fear noise," "Memorize the names of your fingers to keep your mind alert." They sounded foolish, but somehow they worked. And in a place so uncertain, working was one of the few things that could still be defined. Someone once asked her, "How do I not lose who I am?" She smiled softly and said, "Keep something that only you know. A song, an image, or a phrase from your childhood." That person chose to remember their last morning of freedom, the way sunlight reflected off a wooden spoon while sipping tea. Just a small detail. But each time they recalled it, it opened an invisible door, a temporary ticket out of the cold stone walls. One night, the Herb Lady whispered, "Do you know why they fear us? Because they don't understand. And what they don't understand, they try to erase." That sentence was like a tiny thorn, painless when it pierced, but impossible to forget. People began to realize that pain didn't only come from punishment, but from self-doubt. When you begin to believe you are abnormal, you also begin to believe you are not worth remembering. On a morning when rain slipped through the cracks in the wall, the entire cell block fell silent. No sleep, no whispering. Everyone lay still, as if mourning something that had yet to be named. Then from a corner, a soft voice began to sing, a lullaby with only 4 notes. It was the Herb Lady. Not loud, not long, just like wind brushing past a wooden door. The guard walked by. He paused, peering through the slit, then walked away. No one was called. But from that day on, she never sang again. No one knew why. Maybe from exhaustion, or maybe she had given away. the last of her quiet, to someone else. History records that in 14th century Italy, some cities allowed prisoners to dye their hair before execution so they could depart with an impressive appearance. Some called it the final act of kindness. Others called it a disguise for cruelty. To this day, there is no consensus. Back in the dungeon, people began inventing their own small rituals, like touching the wall 3 times every morning, not out of superstition, but because rituals create rhythm, and wherever there is rhythm, there is life. One man once said, "If I ever get out of here, I'll buy shoes that don't make a sound." When asked why, he replied, "Because I want to walk through the market without anyone knowing I was ever here." That sentence sent a chill through many, not from the cold, but because, for the first time, they dared to imagine that they might truly leave. That night, curled beneath thin fabric, someone heard a soft rustling in the hallway. It wasn't the guards. It was the sound of dragging slippers, even steps. Gentle. Someone whispered. Someone's dancing. Perhaps it was a hallucination. Perhaps someone had gone mad. But strangely, the others smiled, because at least someone was still dancing, and someone was still listening, in a place smothered by darkness. Sometimes, just one strange sound was enough to remind people that we are still alive. You are awakened not by a shout, but by an uncanny silence. No more familiar groans, no dawn whispers, no rumble of wooden wheels rolling past the corridor. Everything is empty. Then the door opens. 2 guards appear. No words, no shackles, no cudgels, no pushing. They simply motion for you to follow, a nameless ritual. And in that instant, you know, either you are about to be set free, or you are about to have no need of freedom at all. They lead you to a single occupancy cell. No one else. No shared breathing through the wall. No human odor. This room feels cleaner than you remember. A wooden bed, a thin blanket, and a glazed earthen chamber pot. In that setting, such kindness is what truly makes you uneasy. The stone walls are still cold, but the chill here carries a different note, not quite threatening, more like a gentle farewell. You run your fingers over each block, reassuring yourself you are still here, still existing. What frightens you, in the end, is not death itself. It is the thought that no one might witness you ever lived. Meals arrive on schedule, regular. There is even bread and a hard wedge of cheese. The guard never meets your eyes. He sets the tray down, turns away. To him, it seems, you are no longer a prisoner, but a name already crossed off a list. You eat, yet do not feel hunger. You sleep, yet do not feel tired. It is as though you drift between 2 beats, between an unspoken sentence and a door not yet opened. Inside this new cell, you begin reciting your name again. every night. A declaration that you are still yourself. I am called. The phrase repeats like a lullaby. Not for anyone else to hear, but so you can still remember. You once heard the herb lady say, "To fear death is easy, but to fear being forgotten, that is the emptiest fear of all." Back then, you thought she exaggerated. Now you are not so sure. One morning, smoke wafts through a crack in the wall. Not thick, just a faint char mixed with herbs. You know there is judgment today. In memory, you recall the rumors. A stone-paved yard, a pillar in the center of the square, and the gaze of the crowd. Some once fought for a front view, as if attending a performance. You shiver, not from imagining the scene, but from realizing, perhaps, once, you too stood in that crowd. Day follows day. No one enters. No one calls. Only you and the faint beat of a heart. One night, you dream of your mother. She says nothing. She merely holds your hand, leading you through a forest. Moonlight shimmers. Grass brushes your knees. Within the dream, you grow small, then find yourself cradled in familiar arms. Upon waking, your eyes are wet. The first time in weeks. Not from fear, but because the dream proves you still have memories. And memories are proof you are not entirely lost. Next morning, the guard opens the door. He hands you a set of clothes, not prison garb. A dark gray coat, thick cloth, its hem still caked with mud. No explanation. You do not ask. You simply put it on. You are led away, along a long corridor, through open archways. In a corner room, you glimpse the herb lady sitting, eyes closed. Perhaps she sleeps. Perhaps she wanders a distant dream. You ascend a stone stair onto an open yard. The wind is biting, yet clean. For the first time in a long while, you draw a deep breath. The scent of ash in the air reminds you. Some things, even when burned to dust, still leave traces behind. You do not know where you are going. No one says. But you begin to walk. No one stops you. No one walks beside you. Only a long, cold stone road. You pass an old alley, across a barren field, past a dry pond where ducks once called. You do not look back. You dare not. For if you turned, perhaps there would be nothing left to see. Dusk gathers. A black cat sits silently on a stone doorstep, watching you. You look back. It does not move. It only watches. You lower your head, exhale, and whisper one last time. My name is... Now, you are no longer in the dungeon. No more dim light slipping through cracks in the wall. No more dragging footsteps. No more clanging iron bars in the night. All of it has receded into the past like a dense memory, blurred between reality and dream. But not all nightmares end when you wake. Some you simply learn how to walk out of. You walk slowly, not because your body is weary, but because you're not yet used to a freedom so vast. Before you lies a dirt path bathed in sunset. On both sides, fields sway gently in the wind. No more barriers, no more commands, no more watching eyes. Only you, and for the first time, that no longer feels frightening. You stop beneath the shade of a tree. The rustling leaves don't echo prison whispers, but sound like nature singing a welcome. The wind runs through your hair, not to restrain you, but to remind you you've returned to yourself. Now, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to cry to be seen. You only need to breathe, softly, steadily, calmly, like the wind. You close your eyes. Everything is over. But history has never truly been over. What happened inside the dungeon was not merely a personal tragedy, but a mirror reflecting how a society can use fear to preserve order. In every cold stone hallway are traces of an age that did not yet know the concept of human rights. And in every quiet breath of the forgotten is a warning for the future. The lesson here is not about blame, but about the power to remember and to understand. We retell these stories, not to live in the past, but to learn how not to repeat it. Because there is no prison tighter than forgetting, and no freedom stronger than understanding. If history could speak, it might not scream, but only whisper. Do not close your eyes when others are forgotten. Do not stay silent when truth is twisted. And do not turn away when power goes unchecked. You have left the dungeon, but stories like this still remain, in books, in stone, in memory, waiting to be told, not to plant fear, but to keep our hearts stirred by justice. Because sometimes, the kindest thing we can do for history is to listen to it deeply